Sophia sat by the window of her small, cozy apartment, watching the rain streak down the glass, the gray sky reflecting the quiet emptiness she felt inside, a heaviness that had been growing over months of long, lonely afternoons spent with her thoughts and her work, the silence broken only by the occasional hum of traffic from the street below or the distant bark of a dog, and she sipped at her lukewarm tea, the herbal scent comforting but insufficient to fill the hollow feeling that seemed to stretch endlessly through her chest, a yearning she could not define, a longing for connection and warmth she had almost forgotten she needed, because she had convinced herself that solitude was safe, that being alone was easier than risking disappointment or heartbreak, yet even as she told herself that, a part of her ached, and she found herself staring out at the gray drizzle with a quiet wish that someone, anyone, might suddenly appear at her door to interrupt the quiet, to shake her from the monotony that had become her life, the routine of waking, working, and returning to the silence she had made her companion, a companion that was loyal and predictable but lacking the spark she secretly craved, a spark that had been absent for so long that she almost didn't remember what it felt like, and she thought about the past, about family gatherings that had once been filled with laughter and the warmth of voices echoing through her childhood home, and she wondered if she would ever feel that alive again, if anyone could break through the walls she had built around her heart, walls that were strong but brittle in unexpected ways, walls that a single word or look might topple if it came at the right moment. And as she traced the droplets racing each other down the windowpane, she felt a flutter of anticipation mixed with fear, a sense that maybe life could surprise her still, that maybe she wasn't entirely trapped in her quiet prison of routine and solitude. When suddenly, the sharp ring of the doorbell cut through the hum of the rain and her thoughts, startling her, making her heart skip a beat, and she frowned at the unexpected sound, setting her cup down on the table and walking toward the door, her fingers lingering on the knob for a brief moment as she wondered who could be visiting on such a dreary afternoon, and when she opened it, there he was, Daniel, her nephew, standing there with his coat damp from the rain, hair slightly mussed, cheeks flushed with cold, and eyes wide with hesitation, a bright smile that was familiar yet softened by something she could not immediately place, a vulnerability that tugged at her heart, and he said simply, "Hi, Sophia. I hope I'm not disturbing you," and even in those few words, there was a careful nervousness, a gentle honesty that made her invite him inside without thinking, her usual caution giving way to instinct, to the magnetic pull of family and connection that she had denied herself for so long, and as she stepped aside, letting him enter, the faint smell of wet earth and rain clinging to him seemed to fill the apartment with life, a stark contrast to the quiet that had dominated the space for months. And she noticed the subtle changes in him, the way he carried himself, the way his eyes lingered on the familiar corners of her apartment, taking in memories and familiarities, a silent acknowledgement of shared history that made her chest ache in a way she hadn't anticipated, a reminder that time had passed and yet some connections, some bonds, remained, unbroken by distance or silence. And as he shook off his coat and shrugged off the dampness, Sophia's mind raced with questions she didn't dare voice, wondering why he had come, what he wanted to say, and feeling a strange, almost electric anticipation, a sense that whatever conversation was about to unfold might shift something inside her, something she had kept buried beneath routines and quiet evenings. And as Daniel moved toward the living room, setting his shoes neatly by the door, there was a pause, a moment, where the weight of unspoken words and shared memories hung between them, thick and potent, making the air feel alive, almost charged, and Sophia realized with a start that she hadn't felt this kind of attention, this kind of presence, in a long time, that there was something tender in the way he looked at her, something that felt like recognition not just of who she was, but of who she had been, of who she might still be, and it made her stomach flutter with nervous energy, a mixture of excitement and fear she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years, and as she motioned for him to sit, he chose the chair across from her, and the rain continued its quiet symphony outside, a backdrop to the sudden intimacy of the room. The walls that had seemed so familiar now filled with the potential of discovery and connection, and Sophia felt the faint stirring of emotions she thought she had locked away, emotions that whispered of care, of longing, of understanding, and she wondered how much of this visit was accidental and how much was inevitable, the pull of family and unspoken truths drawing them together in ways neither could fully articulate yet both could feel, and as Daniel leaned back, brushing a wet strand of hair from his forehead, He met her eyes again, and there was a quiet gravity in his gaze, a message without words, a hint that whatever he had come to say, whatever had prompted this unexpected visit, would change something fundamental in her, that this quiet afternoon might mark the beginning of a shift she hadn't known she needed, and Sophia's fingers flexed slightly, gripping the edge of the chair, her mind a whirl of anticipation and fear, of hope and trepidation, because even in this first moment, she sensed that life was about to ripple outward in ways that could not be contained, that this brief encounter, this unplanned visit, held the potential to stir emotions and awaken desires that had long been dormant, and she realized that she was ready, despite the uncertainty, to face whatever truths he had come to share, to engage with the vulnerability and honesty he carried in his quiet presence, and as the minutes stretched, filled with the soft sound of rain and the faint ticking of the wall clock, Sophia felt a strange, fluttering certainty that nothing about her life would remain the same after this, that the calm monotony she had built around herself was about to give way to connection, to raw emotion, to the awakening of feelings she hadn't fully acknowledged, and the moment was alive, fragile, brimming with potential, and she knew, deep in her heart, that Daniel's visit, so simple and unplanned, so innocent in appearance, would leave a mark that lingered long after the rain had stopped and the day moved forward, a mark that would change the way she saw herself, the people she loved, and the world outside her quiet window, because in that brief, electric meeting at the doorway, the world had shifted, subtly, irrevocably, and Sophia, holding her breath, felt the first stirrings of a story she hadn't yet lived but was already a part of. The story of an afternoon that began with rain and a doorbell and ended with the quiet knowledge that life, connection, and emotion could still surprise her when she least expected it. The rain continued to fall softly against the window, a steady, soothing rhythm that seemed to echo the quiet intensity in the room as Sophia and Daniel settled across from each other in the living room, the air between them thick with unspoken thoughts and the subtle electricity of vulnerability. Daniel shifting slightly in his chair, fingers brushing over the fabric of his coat as if testing the reality of being here, of sharing this moment, while Sophia, still adjusting to the unexpected intimacy of his presence, felt her heart beat faster, her mind caught between the familiar comfort of family and the strange, gentle pull of emotions she hadn't anticipated, and Daniel began to speak, his voice low but steady, recounting the past year in his own words, the small victories and disappointments, the quiet loneliness of living away from everyone he loved, the new experiences that had shaped him, and yet through it all, there was a vulnerability that made Sophia lean forward slightly, caught by the sincerity in his eyes, the careful way he chose each word, as if weighing them for impact, and she realized that she had almost forgotten how it felt to truly listen, to give herself fully to a conversation without distraction, without pretense, and she marveled at how effortless it felt with him, how natural the pauses were, how the silences were not empty but full, filled with the weight of meaning, with the space for reflection and understanding, and as Daniel spoke of missing his family, of nights when he felt adrift and uncertain, of moments when he longed for someone to see him truly, Sophia felt an ache deep in her chest, a mix of empathy and a surprising tenderness, a sense that she was being entrusted with a part of his soul, a fragment of his world that he had not shared with anyone else, and she wanted to reach out, to offer comfort, yet she hesitated, sensing the fragility of this moment, the delicate balance between connection and intrusion, and as he continued, his words took on a more personal tone, describing the subtle ways he had noticed her influence in his life, the guidance she had offered without overt instruction, the kindness and patience she had always shown him, and in that moment, Sophia felt a strange warmth, a recognition of herself in his gratitude, a sense that the care she had poured out silently over the years had made a difference, that her presence, however quiet, had mattered more than she had realized, and Daniel's gaze lingered on her, soft yet searching, an unspoken question in his eyes that made her heart flutter unexpectedly, a gentle pull she hadn't expected from the familiar bonds of family. And he continued, voice quieter now, almost a whisper, saying that he had always felt understood by her, even when he hadn't said anything, that there was a comfort in her presence that he couldn't describe but that had shaped his choices, his perspective, his sense of self, and as Sophia absorbed his words, she realized that the depth of their connection had been quietly growing for years, unnoticed, unacknowledged, until this precise moment when it felt tangible, almost palpable, and she struggled to maintain composure, to remain the aunt she had always been, while internally something in her stirred, a mixture of pride, affection, and a startling awareness of longing that made her chest tighten and her mind spin, and Daniel, noticing the subtle shift, hesitated for a moment, eyes flicking away, a faint blush coloring his cheeks, and then he smiled, a small, shy smile that seemed to bridge the distance between them, and Sophia felt herself returning the smile instinctively, her own emotions softening, her heart opening to the possibility that this conversation, this afternoon, might mark a turning point, not just in his life, but in hers as well, as she realized that her carefully maintained solitude had left her unprepared for the sudden, tender intimacy, for the delicate vulnerability of someone who trusted her enough to reveal his inner world, and the more he spoke, the more Sophia felt the layers of her own defenses slowly eroding, the monotony and quiet routine of her days dissolving in the warmth and honesty of his words, and when he paused, the silence was heavy but comforting, the kind of silence that allows reflection and shared understanding, and Sophia found herself compelled to respond, to share fragments of her own life, the disappointments and small triumphs, the moments of heartbreak and quiet hope. And as she spoke, Daniel listened intently, leaning forward slightly, eyes bright with empathy, occasionally nodding, offering a reassuring glance or a gentle smile, and Sophia realized that this exchange, this mutual openness, was more profound than she had anticipated, creating a bridge between them that transcended age, distance, and the casual familiarity of family ties, something deeper, more resonant, a quiet emotional intimacy that felt rare and precious, and as she described her own struggles, the nights of uncertainty, the moments when she had questioned her path, the sense of loneliness that sometimes crept in despite her independence, Daniel reached out almost instinctively, brushing a hand near hers, a gesture of connection and reassurance, small but laden with meaning, and Sophia's heart responded, a fluttering warmth that made her aware of the power of simple presence, of the way someone's attention, focused and sincere, can touch the soul, and Daniel, sensing her response, met her gaze with an intensity that made her stomach turn pleasantly with surprise, a quiet attraction she hadn't expected from a familial relationship, something tender and emotional rather than physical, a recognition of shared understanding and mutual longing for connection that transcended simple affection. And the rain continued its soft rhythm outside, echoing the slow, deliberate unfolding of this intimate conversation, marking time in a way that felt suspended, as if the world outside had paused to let this moment breathe, and Sophia marveled at the way he could speak so honestly, yet so gently, revealing his fears, his hopes, his subtle desires, and in the process, he had opened a door inside her that she hadn't realized was closed, a door to vulnerability, empathy, and a kind of emotional closeness she had been starved for. And as he paused to take a sip of water, the room seemed charged with anticipation, the quiet tension of unspoken feelings hanging like a delicate thread, and he leaned back, a soft exhale escaping him, and said, almost hesitantly, I always looked up to you, Sophia. Even when I didn't say it, I felt like you understood me more than anyone else, and those words, simple yet profound, struck her in ways she couldn't immediately process, a rush of warmth and unexpected emotion flooding her chest, a recognition that the bond between them was more significant than casual family ties, that it carried a depth she hadn't consciously acknowledged, and she felt the sudden, inexplicable urge to reach out, to close the distance, to assure him that the feeling was mutual, that she too had felt the quiet pull of connection, and for a heartbeat, time seemed to suspend itself, the world outside the window forgotten, the rain muted, the apartment transformed into a cocoon of shared humanity and subtle emotional intimacy, and she realized with a start that she had been holding her breath, that the anticipation and vulnerability in the room had created a space of rare honesty, where words carried weight and silence was equally powerful, and as Daniel's eyes searched hers, soft and honest, a question lingering unspoken, Sophia felt a thrill of emotion she hadn't experienced in years, a gentle stirring of something tender, something romantic and dramatic, something that hovered on the edges of familial love but stretched into deeper emotional resonance, and she wondered if he felt it too, if the delicate thread between them was more than coincidence, more than timing, a spark born of shared understanding. And as the rain continued to patter against the glass, Daniel spoke again. Quieter now, almost a whisper, being around you, "It feels like home," and Sophia's heart skipped, a warm, emotional jolt that left her breathless for a moment, a wave of longing and tenderness washing over her, the weight of the day, the loneliness, the quiet months, all dissolving into the simple, heartfelt honesty of his words, and she smiled softly, a tear threatening to escape, a delicate acknowledgement of how much this conversation meant, of the power of someone's presence, someone's trust, someone's openness, to awaken emotions long dormant, and she knew that the afternoon would remain with her, a vivid memory etched in the core of her being, a moment when connection and honesty transcended expectation, a moment that reminded her that even in quiet solitude, life could surprise, could awaken the heart, could open doors she hadn't dared to approach, and as the conversation drifted into stories of small joys, shared memories, and quiet hopes, the bond between them deepened, a tender intimacy that was both emotional and subtly romantic in its resonance, a connection that promised to change how they saw each other and themselves, and Sophia, listening, watching, feeling, realized that this unexpected visit was far more than a simple drop-in. It was the beginning of a transformation, a gentle shift in her heart, a soft awakening to the profound truth that human connection, honesty, and vulnerability could arrive when least expected, that it could open new worlds of emotion and understanding, that it could make an ordinary rainy afternoon feel like a turning point. And as the light outside dimmed and the rain slowed, Sophia and Daniel remained in that quiet, charged space, the unspoken threads of trust, affection, and subtle longing weaving between them, promising that the story of their connection was only just beginning, and that the way they saw each other, and themselves, would never be the same again. The soft rain outside had begun to taper, leaving behind a quiet freshness in the air that mingled with the faint scent of wet earth and the lingering aroma of tea in the room, and Sophia and Daniel sat across from each other, the conversation having shifted into deeper waters, words flowing easily yet carrying weight, each sentence layered with honesty, vulnerability, and subtle emotion, as Daniel spoke of the struggles he had faced over the past year, the moments when he had felt invisible, when the world seemed too heavy to navigate alone, and Sophia listened intently, leaning forward slightly, her heart tightening as she recognized the raw sincerity in his voice, the careful pauses that punctuated his sentences, each one a small revelation, a small offering of trust that made the room feel smaller, more intimate, charged with a quiet intensity, and she realized that what she was hearing was more than a simple recounting of events. It was a window into his soul, a glimpse of the person he had become and the parts of himself he had kept hidden, not out of shame but out of habit, out of the natural reticence that life often instills, and as he spoke, he admitted, almost hesitantly, that he had been struggling with feelings of isolation, even when surrounded by people, that there were nights when he felt unmoored, adrift in a world that moved too fast for him to keep up with, and that sometimes the only solace he could find was in memories of home, in the thought of people who truly understood him, and Sophia felt a deep ache in her chest, a mixture of empathy and an unexpected, tender longing, as she realized how much he needed connection, and how much she had missed the chance to share these moments, to provide the quiet comfort that only presence and attention can offer, and Daniel's eyes, earnest and vulnerable, met hers with a gravity that made her stomach flutter, a subtle awareness of something more than familial affection stirring, a warmth that was unfamiliar yet comforting, and she knew without words that this afternoon was more than a visit, it was an emotional reckoning, a meeting of hearts that had both been shaped by absence, longing, and unspoken truths, and as Daniel continued, he spoke of the ways he had admired her, not just as an aunt, but as a person who had always embodied patience, strength, and gentle guidance, how he had noticed the quiet decisions she made, the kindnesses she extended without expectation, the resilience she showed in the face of disappointment. And Sophia felt a rush of emotion, realizing that her influence had been greater than she had understood, that her presence, even in moments she thought were insignificant, had shaped his life in subtle but meaningful ways, and she reached out instinctively, her hand brushing near his, an unspoken gesture of comfort and connection that made both of them pause, the small movement loaded with significance, a bridge between words and feelings, a silent acknowledgement of their shared bond, and Daniel, sensing the delicate weight of the moment, smiled faintly, a shy, almost hesitant smile, one that carried the kind of intensity that left Sophia breathless, a mixture of pride, warmth, and something tender, something emotional, a subtle hint at the romantic undertones that were stirring quietly beneath the surface of their familial connection. A complexity neither had fully acknowledged, but both were beginning to feel, and as the conversation shifted, Daniel admitted, voice barely above a whisper, that he often thought about what it meant to feel understood, to feel seen, to feel truly accepted, and that he had realized in moments spent thinking of her presence, her words, her encouragement, that she had always offered a rare form of comfort, a quiet certainty in a world full of noise, and Sophia, listening, felt a surge of emotion, a flutter in her chest that left her both anxious and exhilarated, a recognition that the intimacy of this moment was changing her in ways she hadn't anticipated, making her aware of the dormant desires, the longings she had kept tucked away beneath years of solitude, of rational thought, of self-protection, and she caught herself holding her breath, heart racing, aware that the simple act of being present, of listening, of offering warmth and empathy, had transformed into something much more profound, a tender, delicate bond that carried the possibility of emotional and romantic depth without yet stepping across boundaries, a quiet dance of feelings that neither dared name aloud, and Daniel, sensing her attention and perhaps her silent response, leaned forward slightly, his eyes searching hers with an intensity that made the air between them almost tangible, thick with unspoken words and mutual recognition, and then he spoke, more deliberately now, voice tinged with emotion, I know this might sound strange, but I've realized something about myself. Being around you, it feels like home, and the words, simple and unadorned, hit Sophia with a wave of warmth and a rush of unexpected feelings, a realization that the emotional landscape between them had shifted, that the quiet trust and intimacy had opened a door to something tender, gentle, romantic even, without ever needing to cross lines or break the safe, familial boundaries, a subtle, mature connection that resonated deeply within her, making her heart ache with longing and understanding. All at once, and she struggled to find words, her mouth dry, her mind racing with the implications, the emotions, the sudden awareness of how much she had missed being seen, being appreciated, being understood in such a profound way, and as Daniel's gaze lingered, almost pleading for recognition, almost vulnerable in a way that left her breathless, she felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, a mix of joy, astonishment, and the gentle sting of unspoken desire, of longing that had nowhere to go but to exist quietly between them, as the room seemed to hold its breath, the rain outside now a soft, distant murmur, the world outside irrelevant, and in that pause, Sophia realized that the emotional gravity of this moment was reshaping her perception of him, of herself, of the possibilities for connection that she had long thought closed, that even in ordinary afternoons, extraordinary moments could bloom if hearts were open and brave enough to embrace vulnerability, and Daniel, noticing the subtle change in her expression, offered a small, understanding nod, an acknowledgement of shared awareness, and in that silent exchange, something shifted, a mutual recognition that the trust, honesty, and emotional openness between them had become sacred, a delicate, tender, intimate space, a shared heartbeat of understanding that transcended words, and as the minutes stretched, filled with quiet reflection and soft exchanges, Daniel spoke again, softer, slower, almost shyly, revealing fragments of his fears, his hopes, and even subtle longings he hadn't articulated before, confessions that spoke not just of familial love but of the deeper, more complex tapestry of human emotion, of yearning for connection and understanding that borders on romantic in its intensity, yet remains gentle, respectful, and deeply moving, and Sophia, listening, felt the threads of her own hidden desires awaken. The realization that she had been quietly longing for this kind of honesty and emotional closeness all along, that the walls she had built around her heart were slowly dissolving in the warmth and sincerity of his presence, that the quiet afternoon had transformed into a crucible for emotional awakening, a safe, tender space for mutual vulnerability. And as Daniel's eyes softened, reflecting trust and unspoken affection, she felt an almost magnetic pull toward him, not physical, but emotional, a desire to protect, comfort, and connect, a recognition that love in its many forms could manifest subtly, gently, in the quiet honesty of two people truly seeing each other. And then, just as she prepared to respond, a sudden knock at the door startled them both, interrupting the delicate rhythm of their shared intimacy, a small intrusion that reminded them of the world outside. And yet even with the interruption, the atmosphere lingered, charged with the intensity of their confessions, their shared vulnerability, their quiet recognition of the deeper bond forming between them, a bond that promised to shift the trajectory of their relationship, to open doors to understanding, to tender emotional connection. And Sophia, heart-racing, realized that this afternoon, this unplanned, rainy, intimate conversation, had changed everything, that Daniel's words, his openness, his honesty, had awakened something in her that she could not ignore, that the story of their relationship was being rewritten in real time, and that the confession hanging in the air, the quiet acknowledgement of belonging, of emotional home, was the beginning of a journey that neither of them fully understood yet, but both felt profoundly, deeply, in the quiet, charged space of that living room, where the rain had stopped but the emotions it had carried remained, palpable, unspoken, and transformative, marking the moment when their hearts first began to navigate a new, tender landscape of feelings, intimacy, and the subtle, quiet stirrings of romantic, emotional connection that would shape the rest of their story together. The knock at the door had broken the fragile, intimate rhythm between Sophia and Daniel, yet as they looked at each other, both hearts still racing and eyes glistening, they realized that the quiet tension, the unspoken emotions, the tender confessions that had filled the room were not erased but suspended, lingering like a delicate perfume that refuses to dissipate. And Daniel, adjusting his coat and brushing a stray wet strand of hair from his forehead, gave her a small, understanding smile that acknowledged both the intrusion and the weight of what had just passed between them, a smile that made Sophia's chest tighten with a bittersweet ache because she knew the moment was nearing its natural pause, yet she also understood that the door, the interruption, had not diminished the significance of their exchange, that it had instead magnified it, leaving them both aware of the fragile, tender connection that had blossomed in the hours of conversation, laughter, shared silence, and gentle vulnerability. And as Daniel stepped toward the door, he paused, one hand on the handle, turning slightly to look at her with an intensity that caught her breath, a soft exhale escaping him, and he said, "I should probably go, but, thank you, Sophia, for listening, for understanding, for being you." And the words, simple and heartfelt, struck her with the force of their sincerity, making her fingers flex instinctively, gripping the edge of the chair as if trying to anchor herself to the reality of the moment while simultaneously wishing to suspend it forever. And Sophia, feeling the warmth of her own emotions rising, the gentle ache of longing, the quiet realization that her life had shifted in subtle but profound ways over the past few hours, whispered, almost shyly, "Daniel, sometimes we don't realize how much someone can change our world until they're right here." And the words carried a weight, a soft confessional tone that made him pause, his hand lingering on the doorknob as if he had not expected such acknowledgement, as if he had not anticipated that the tender bond they had nurtured in conversation could ripple outward and touch her so deeply. And as he met her gaze, their eyes locked, a silent understanding passing between them, a quiet recognition that what had begun as an ordinary visit on a rainy afternoon had transformed into something rare, intimate, emotionally resonant, a bridge between hearts that neither had fully expected but both felt profoundly. And as the seconds stretched, the room heavy with emotion, Daniel offered a small nod, almost imperceptible, yet charged with meaning, before stepping outside, the cool post-rain air greeting him, the faint scent of wet earth mixing with the lingering warmth of their connection. And Sophia closed the door slowly, leaning against it, a tremor of awareness running through her body, a realization that the quiet, orderly solitude she had cultivated for so long was no longer sufficient, that something had awakened within her, a soft, tender awareness of longing, of desire, of the subtle, romantic, emotional stirrings that had quietly grown during their conversation. And she moved back to the living room, her eyes following the fading figure through the window, watching the way he disappeared down the wet street, each step a small reminder that life, connection, and emotion could surprise her, that vulnerability and honesty could transform the ordinary into something extraordinary. And as she sank back into her chair, her hands clasped loosely in her lap, she felt the weight of the afternoon settle in, a gentle heaviness that was both comforting and exhilarating, a sense of being alive in ways she had forgotten, the quiet thrill of knowing that hearts could open unexpectedly, that trust and honesty could create a resonance that lingered long after the conversation ended. And she reflected on the words he had spoken, on the way he had looked at her, on the unspoken emotions that had hovered like delicate threads between them, weaving a tapestry of subtle, mature, romantic and emotional intimacy, the kind that neither needed to be named to be felt, and she realized that this was the beginning of a new chapter, a quiet awakening to feelings that had lain dormant beneath years of routine and self-protection. Feelings that were tender, emotional, and deeply human, and she thought about the way life had shifted in a single afternoon, how the simplest gestures, a shared story, a glance, a hand brushing near hers, could alter perspectives, awaken hearts, and create connections that endure, and Sophia allowed herself to remember the laughter they had shared, the pauses that had carried more meaning than words, the confessions that had been whispered into the soft, post-rain air, and she smiled softly, a tear threatening to fall, a recognition that emotional intimacy, when nurtured, could be transformative, that life was capable of surprising her in ways that were beautiful, gentle, and profound, and as she gazed out the window at the glistening streets, the puddles reflecting the dim afternoon light, she realized that Daniel's presence, brief as it had been, had left a mark on her heart, a tender, subtle imprint that would shape the way she saw herself, her relationships, and the possibilities of connection in the days and months to come, and she thought about the quiet strength required to be vulnerable, the courage it took for both of them to reveal hidden truths, to acknowledge longing, to sit with honesty and emotion without fear. And she understood that this was rare, a gift that could not be taken lightly, and the rain, now reduced to a gentle drizzle, seemed to echo the softness of her own reflection, a quiet accompaniment to the emotional landscape she was navigating. And she thought of the small things, his smile, the intensity of his gaze, the warmth in his voice, the way he had trusted her with fragments of his inner life, and realized that these details, seemingly insignificant, carried the power to reshape hearts, to awaken dormant desires, to illuminate the possibilities of connection, trust, and mature, gentle romance. And as the light faded outside, casting the room in muted shadows, Sophia felt a calm, profound certainty settling in, a knowledge that life had shifted in ways she could not yet fully comprehend but that would continue to unfold, that the story of their bond, their subtle, emotional, almost romantic connection, had only begun, and that even in ordinary, rainy afternoons, extraordinary transformation could occur when hearts were open, when honesty was shared, when human beings allowed themselves to truly see one another, and she reflected on the way Daniel had paused at the door, the quiet intensity of his farewell, the sincerity in his words, and she realized that she would carry this afternoon with her always, as a memory of emotional awakening, a reminder of the gentle power of connection, a testament to the beauty of vulnerability. And as she settled back into her chair, hands resting lightly on the armrests, she let herself breathe fully for the first time that day. Feeling the lingering warmth of his presence in her chest, the flutter of unspoken emotions, and the tender knowledge that life, love, and human connection are unpredictable, miraculous, and capable of transforming the simplest moments into experiences that remain with us forever. And she understood that although Daniel had left, his words, his honesty, and the quiet emotional intimacy they had shared would continue to resonate, shaping her perspective, awakening her heart, and leaving her ready for the next chapter, the next conversation, the next gentle unfolding of feelings that were as subtle as they were profound. And Sophia smiled softly to herself, a quiet, emotional smile, one that carried longing, hope, and the tender promise of connection that had been awakened in a single, unexpected, rainy afternoon, realizing fully that her life, her heart, and the way she saw everything had changed in ways she would never forget, in ways that would guide her gently, quietly, and profoundly for all the days to come.